Welcome, everybody, here in the VDPH lab, Ca Foscari in Venice, and at home and wherever you are, to yet another cycle of seminars in digital and public humanities. So we have a beautiful program of 6 seminars until early summer, and we start today with a highlight already. So every of these seminars will be a highlight, but this is a special highlight, a special pleasure for me to introduce you briefly to Peter Robinson, which does not need any introduction, I think. So Peter Robinson is has been. Oh, yeah, I will turn the camera otherwise. Then. Yeah. Okay. Has been called the godfather of digital scholarly editions
by you.
By myself, and I do it all the time. So what James Brown is for funk and soul music, that's Peter Robinson for digital scholarly editions. So a practitioner from the very beginning until now, and with countless contribution theorizing the scholarly editing in the digital environment. We are very honored and pleased that Peter is a visiting professor at the moment here at Ca Foscari, and we exploit all his competences and expertise. So just 2 days ago, he gave a presentation to our doctoral students in Italianistica about his long journey in editing texts from the beginning of Icelandic texts and the stemmatology of Icelandic texts in the early 90s as his PhD project in Oxford. Then the world famous Chaucer edition, who really was or has been the game changer in the field. And since then, Peter has been involved in so many projects, I mean, of international importance, the Greek New Testament, Chaucer. You will refer to all those. So Codex Sinaiticus, so countless editions. Dante's Divina Commedia, or the Commedia of Dante, Teseida of Giovanni Boccaccio, so endless. So it's a great pleasure. So
good afternoon, everyone, and I'm particularly pleased to see several old friends online. So I'll give a hello, special welcome to Kat Smith and Hugh Horton from the Greek New Testament projects. I hope you're not too embarrassed by what I have to say about the Greek New Testament along the way. I'll try to be as accurate as I can. And I should say thank you, friends, for introducing someone else. Again, but perhaps I'll try to be that person during the course. I think each of our introductions gets slightly more Baroque, Rococo, or whatever each time. But anyway. Okay, so digital editions are changing philology, and when I first thought of saying this, giving this talk, I had not actually read the scholarly digital edition manifesto, which Franz pointed out to us on Monday. So, which contained this, I thought, quite extraordinary sentence. Le edizioni digitali sono ormai la norma in tutte le discipline. And as I said on Monday, well, if only this were actually the case. It's actually a translation of the German phrase, which I give down the bottom of the screen, but perhaps can you see that? Oh, it's hidden.
It was hidden behind the bar, unfortunately, but you can move the bar. I can move the bar.
You can move the bar?
I try, yeah.
Okay. All right.
Where should I move it?
Yeah. Oh, that'll do. I think I'm working on the wrong page right now. Somehow.
Yeah, if you go back.
Yeah.
Back should be here.
Ah, that should be. It's not moving there.
No, but it should be
here.
Okay. Okay. I move it.
All right.
Oh, at least now it can be read.
All right.
Yeah. Okay.
So, in fact, I've done over the last few years, from time to time, I've kept an eye on just how many digital editions are being made. It's certainly true that when some of us, many of us really, first began to think about digital editions, scholarly editions in digital form, we were very focused right back in the 1990s or so on the situation of a text in many versions, which is very much the kinds of edition that I'm involved in. And as we'll see in this talk, where there has been some real work done. It seemed quite obvious in 1990 or so to those who were thinking about it that digital methods would have the greatest impact in the editing of works which existed in many, many versions. So the Canterbury Tales with 88 manuscripts, the Commedia with 800, Greek New Testament with somewhere over 5,600 or so, etc., etc. And what's actually happened, so we thought, and there was a lot of effort went in the 90s to beginning projects along that. But in fact, it hasn't worked out that way. There are, as Franz again pointed out on Monday, and as you can find out from looking at the catalogues of Patrick Seiler and Greta Francini and others, there are a large number of digital editions of single documents, somewhere over 1,000 at least. But when it comes to editions of works in many documents, depending on how you define it, there are somewhere between maybe 10 and 30 only, made over the course of 30 years, which I think if I had been told that 30 years ago, I'd have said, if this cannot be right. Because in the early 1990s, many, many people, not just myself, but pretty much anybody who was dealing with the text in many versions became excited about the possibility of using digital methods to deal with 800 manuscripts of the Commedia, etc. But in fact, there are some numbers here, which I think, I'm afraid, give the lie to the statement that this is la norma. So less than 30 or so digital editions of works in multiple versions. The same time, more or less, well, two-step, for example, which goes back before 1990, there are around 1,200 editions have been made in two-step, many of them of works in multiple manuscripts. The Stefan Hagel classical text editor, which is very widely in use, has at least 240 editions, all made since about 2002 or so. And there are very notable centers of textual editing, which use, particularly the one at Leuven comes to mind, which make all their editions using the classical text editor system, which basically produces very beautiful, very elaborate print books, but not digital editions. My figures, Oxford Scholarly Editions online, now counts somewhere getting close to 2,000 editions, many lots more of multiple text. Cambridge University Press has over 4,000. One could go on. The numbers are simply overwhelming. Print editions far outnumber digital editions in this field. And the numbers are, the gap is not narrowing. If anything, it is growing wider. 630 or so editions from Oxford in the last 3 years. Maybe even more telling, and me almost hurtful, is editions which were planned as digital. A really good example is the Cambridge University Press edition of Jonathan Swift, which one of us first imagined was going to be fully digital. They were going to digitize all the manuscripts of Swift, all the early print editions, all the letters, etc., and then put them together into an online edition. Over quite a short period of time, they backed off from that, and they decided they would not pursue that. There are many more examples of that. Cambridge Conrad, the Cambridge D.H. Lawrence, series after series, which actually made a significant move towards becoming a digital edition, changed their mind, and went back to print. Digital methods have had an impact. They have made it possible to make print editions much better, much more cheaply, with multiple layers of footnotes and so forth, and beautifully printed, and also quite expensive too. But the promise of the print edition has simply not, of the digital edition, has simply not been realized over this 30 years. This sounds like a good way to, this sounds like I'm going to end the talk right now and say I'm not talking about how digital editions have changed philology, but they have not changed philology. Well, actually, I think what I want to say, look at today, is some examples of digital editions or editions using digital methods. And we'll see there is a distinction to be made between those two terms. And cases where they have really been successful and they really have and are changing philology. And I think the number one example is the Greek New Testament. So I have some people here watching who know much more about this than I do, so I have to be a little bit careful about what I say. But we don't have to, fortunately, I don't have to give very much of an introduction. Everyone knows what the Greek New Testament is. The first, the leading Greek New Testament edition is that of Nestor Aland, which was founded by Eberhard Nestor, and the first edition under his name came out in 1898, over 125 years ago. And since then, there has been a continuing stream of editions, basically adopting the fundamental methodology of Nestor, of Eberhard Nestor, then adapted and elaborated by a succession of other scholars, his son, and then most of all, Kurt Aland from 1950s on. And the aim was to look at all the evidence from the beginning. Their aim was to assemble all the evidence they could about all the versions of the Greek New Testament and related texts, all the versions in Latin, Syriac, Armenian, Coptic, and from that, draw together all that could be known about the early history of the text and use that to create an edition. Most notably, even as far back, probably as, I think actually I've said 1990 here, but I think Hugh might correct me on this, digital methods were being used significantly by the Nestor Aland group in the Institute for New Testament Research in Munster, Germany, from certainly the 1980s, I would say. So material was being compiled into a database within the 1980s, well before the internet came, well before we thought of digital editions. Simply, the Nestor Aland, the Greek New Testament editing project, recognized the potential of digital methods to hold information. From around 2000 on, or 1998 on, when I first met people from Munster and later Birmingham, and the next big shift that was taken, or the first step that was taken by the Nestor Aland, by the Greek Institute, was to adopt what we now call the Canterbury Tales model, which was they would make full text transcriptions of all the manuscripts, and they would compare all those full text transcriptions. Not quite true, not quite all the manuscripts, but certainly at least what were the 30 key manuscripts. And as time went by, they would, for each section of the Greek Testament, they would decide what's that going to do? Do I have to say yes or no?
What does it say?
I've got a nasty mitt.
Oh, no, just skip. No.
Can I? I'm not sure I can. Okay. All right. So they adopted the model, and absolutely inconsistent with the model of editing, that they would gather all the evidence, all the manuscripts together, and from all of that evidence, arrive at a text. So when they met me, and I was trying to do the same work with Chaucer, there was immediate kind of recognition. We had the same goal. I wanted to edit Chaucer from all the manuscripts. They wanted to edit the Greek New Testament from all the manuscripts. So we formed an immensely fruitful alliance, which I'll say a little more how that worked. And that alliance, just to make it briefly, has really fundamentally altered the field of New Testament scholarship, New Testament textual scholarship, in a way I think that's far beyond the effect of digital editing on any other field of philology. as we'll observe in a minute. Traditional philologists routinely ignore digital editions, even when they are full of information that would help them immensely. This is not the case in the Greek New Testament. In the Greek New Testament area, digital scholarship has really become the center of textual scholarship. And the reasons for this fundamentally are 4 words. There are other reasons as well, some which I'll touch on, but this essentially, the coherence-based genealogical method, which was developed in Munster from around 1990s on by a very fine scholar, Gerd Nick, a very cultured and and creative scholar, I think one would say, and a master of computers and statistics and ideas. And so he developed a quite, at that time and still, pretty much unique to Greek New Testament scholarship, a method of analyzing relations among manuscripts and extracting information useful for editors, which was designed specifically for the Greek New Testament and to deal particularly with famous problems such as contamination. This method has actually become highly controversial in many ways. I'm not sure controversial is quite the right word. Contested, I'm not sure. Debated is probably the right word. The world, so it is New Testament scholars all around the world who are interested in the text of the Greek New Testament, and there are a lot, many of them. They have had to confront this method because this method is being used to choose readings for the Nestle-Aland editions. So the 28th edition of the Nestle-Aland text emerged in 2012, which was the first edition for 20 years. And it included readings which had been selected, partly at least, on the basis of the coherence-based genealogical method. I'm not going to give an introduction to it, but if you Google it, as I've done here, you will find page after page of reference to it because it is so discussed. There are so many articles about it. There's at least one book, a book by Peter Gurry and Tommy Wasserman, A New Approach to Textual Criticism, which is basically about that method and how it has to be used. And it has prompted a quite extraordinary debate among New Testament scholars. This is the heart of it, a diagram. It produces these amazing diagrams that you can see there. You can't really see it. What you do see is like a forest of manuscripts linked together by rivers. It's a little bit like Venice in some ways, you know, the canal system of Venice is holding it together, the whole fundamental. And so that you can, with these, with this visualization, which is based on a full comparison of all the manuscripts, of hundreds of manuscripts in many cases, not all the manuscripts, that's not quite right, but very large and a key selection of all the manuscripts. You can see from this how a reading flows from one manuscript into another, into others, and into groups, into other groups, all the way down. It's an amazing thing to see. But it is, as I said, much debated. There is, and here is a little bit of a debate. Among the many things that the INTF Institute in Munster does, together with its partners, is host blogs. It hosts a whole site of digital tools, allowing people to come in, use these tools themselves, look at the results. And from that, many scholars all around the world, because this is all available online and all the tools have been put online, are able to come to the Greek New Testament site and ask their own questions about the manuscript relations and query the conclusions which are reached by the scholars in Munster or the scholars who are editing. At the same time as the editions of the Nestle-Aland text are coming out every 20 years, the Institutes for Greek New Testament Research in Munster, in partnership with the Institute for Textual Scholarship and Electronic Editing, now headed by Hugh Harton, who is listening to this seminar as we speak, and can correct me in a few minutes. And many other scholars have come together to work on what they call Editio Critica Meo, which is the greater edition, the greater critical edition, which is a much richer edition of each part and a much more comprehensive edition of each part of the Greek New Testament. and which is now released. Many of the Gospels have now been released. You can correct me on that, but I think we now have all the Gospels, the Acts of the Apostles, the Catholic letters have now been fully released in the Critico Major series. And here, for example, is an example of the kind of the debate that goes on around the coherent space method. A Melbourne-based scholar, Stephen Chaucer, who has another group of scholars working with him, and who thinks he's found a flaw in the method. And there is a response here from Greg Paulson, which you can see here, who is one of the editors at the Institute for Greek New Testament Research in Munster. And you can follow the debate yourself. In fact, I'm in this also because rather boldly, I'm not sure this is advised at all, I wrote an article a few years ago with Barbara Borlejo, in which we queried the way the coherent space method works for just one reading. This was an extremely, maybe ill-advised might be the word, or at least impetuous maybe, or perhaps I should have thought before I did this. But in fact, I think there are some genuine and significant issues involved with the method, the way that method is used. Not so much the method itself, but I think the conclusions that are drawn from method, to me, make a whole series of assumptions implicitly without acknowledging them. And that's always a dangerous thing to do in pretty much any field. If you're acting on assumptions which you don't actually acknowledge, you may get results which are suspect and would not be aware of the dangers. And I think that's there are issues there about the CBGM and the way its results are used, but that's beyond the scope of this talk. So I think the conclusion from this, I hope I've shown enough to see this, that in fact, digital methods are la norma. They are the norm in New Testament philology. Why? Well, one reason is these are not actually digital editions. Munster, Birmingham, the other partners have not, apart from one or two examples like Codex Sinaiticus, actually created digital editions, but they use digital methods very extensively. Like the CBGM itself, the coherent space method, is completely digital. It's impossible without a computer to use that. And also, all the data is held in digital form. It's just not published digitally. The major outputs are still print editions. So answering, why is the norm in New Testament philology? Well, partly because of the concentration on digital tools, not editions. That's something which I imagine will be addressed sometime in the future by the partners. But the key elements, though, and one of the keys that made this possible was for that when the Greek New Testament group in Munster began working with the Greek New Testament group in Birmingham, then headed by David Parker, when they got together from the late 1990s on, they agreed to adopt common tools and common data standards so that work done in one institution could be used by scholars attached to another university, to another institution. And now there are many other scholarly groups besides those in Birmingham and Munster who are working with Munster and Birmingham groups to edit collaboratively the Greek New Testament in exactly the way that Franz talked about on Monday. So we have that, and because of that, a critical mass of common digital data has been put together, which no scholar can ignore. There are also very powerful online tools. I've put some links in here. Some of them you can find them yourself fairly easily. And of course, the fundamental reason is why the Greek New Testament, because the text really matters for the Greek New Testament. Whether the Bible is, for many of us, the Bible is a very different piece, or the Gospel of John particularly is a very different piece, if you include or do not include the story of the woman taken in adultery. Just to give one example. David Parker has a wonderful chapter in which he describes the differences if we, depending on how we read the Greek, which manuscripts we read of the Greek New Testament. The Lord's Prayer has a different word. We have women priests or not women priests. We have Jesus resurrected or not resurrected. We have a fairly liberal approach to divorce or not a liberal approach to divorce. So it does matter. The words of the Greek New Testament actually do matter, and people argue and have done for centuries over exactly what words were in the Greek New Testament and what we should be reading. So enough for the Greek New Testament. Just to give some more examples here of that. Here's another example of the sort of the debates which happen. Just one almost chosen at random. You can find hundreds, even thousands of blogs like this devoted to the Greek New Testament, struggling with the text. All right, moving away from the Greek New Testament, let's have a look at Dante's Commedia, and particularly two editions, the edition of Prue Shaw, who was here on Monday to talk about that, and the edition of Giorgio Inglese that you can see on the right hand of the screen, which came out, both editions came out the same year in 2021. The Commedia, the Shaw Commedia is completely digital and fully online. The Giorgio Inglese edition is currently only in print, though in fact we hope in the next year to include his edition in the Shaw edition. So you can effectively look at the text of both together. Some interesting things. Of course, we looked, Giorgio Inglese is a very generous scholar. He is collaborating very closely with us, has been back for years now. And there is a really strong agreement between how he sees the textual tradition of the Commedia and how Prue sees the textual tradition of the Commedia. So there is a basic agreement on the relations among the manuscripts, and there is a basic, and the status of particular manuscripts. And both Shaw and Inglese agree with the editorial conclusions of Petrocchi, and hence with the great majority of readings in Petrocchi. There are probably only a few hundred cases, I would say at the most, where Inglese departs from the Petrocchi text. And Prue has not actually edited the Commedia, but that would be her edition too. Over about 4 years, Inglese contacted me about 4 or 5 years ago, saying, I'm doing the new edition in print for the Società Tentesca. You have some nice stuff. Can I use it? I said, yes, please use it. And he actually used very extensively this tool. If I can actually get this to work now. This one. So what we have as part of the Commedia edition, this very cute and very powerful tool that allows you to ask questions like, I think that these two manuscripts share an ancestor. If I am right, there will be a large number of readings found only in those two manuscripts and nowhere else. Now, if you are asked that question and you have to use a book to find those places, you have to look at every page, at almost every line of every page of every book. And the Commedia is 3 volumes, so it will take you a very long time. Or you can use this tool and you can find the second in approximately the answer in about 1/10 of a second. So this for him was wonderful. So for example, this starts in fact with the reading in Durata, which is found in these 2 manuscripts, Trivolsiano and the Martini annotations on the Aldine edition of 1515 or so. And in fact, this very first example is a case where Inglese chooses a reading because he likes those 2 manuscripts, which Petrocchi does not. When we add Petrocchi Inglese to this, we'll be able to see that. We'll be able to find out exactly where Petrocchi and Inglese disagree or agree. So that tool was immensely valuable to Inglese when he was preparing his edition. I know that because if the site went offline, within half an hour, he would write to me and say, Peter, dove? So I said, well, okay, attenzione, emergenza. Okay, so I responded as soon as I could, always. So we were very happy with that collaboration. But despite that, this is all he said in his digital edition. And I'm not casting doubt. I see exactly why he said that. So this was the extent of his acknowledgement And there are no other references in his edition, although he used our digital edition very extensively. He only used it to confirm what he already knew. And as a result, he didn't really have to refer any more than this to the digital edition. His print edition does not rely on the digital edition. I think he could have used the digital edition a good deal more than he did, but he didn't. He didn't feel he had to. And that, I think, is a lesson too, that for people philologists like Inglese, to really use digital editions, they must have a reason. They must be using, the digital edition must be able to promise them knowledge which they could not gain outside the use of the digital edition. That's become the case in the Greek New Testament scholarship. It's not yet the case in Italian scholarship, in Dante scholarship. So, moving on quickly, because we'll have a quick look at this. The Edviga Agostinelli and Bill Coleman edition of Boccaccio's Teseida. I'm not going to say very much about that, except there is one, I think, very interesting aspect of this edition. The most important result of this edition is to highlight Boccaccio's making of a book, his own autographed manuscript of the Teseida, which he then made a second version of that, and that second version was copied into a later manuscript, but is effectively a clone of his autograph. So we have effectively two autographs written by Boccaccio. And what is most telling about both these manuscripts, and particularly the existing autograph now in Florence, written by Boccaccio in his own hand, with his own decorations, with his own glosses, the whole layout, everything about the design, the artistry, the performance is Boccaccio's own work. This is a book. And this was something which really became important to us the more we worked on the Canterbury Tales. These are books. The text is not just the text. It is not just the words. It is the way the words are put on the page, the way in which parts of the text are marked by different kinds of capitals, by ornamentation, the way glosses appear. And it's a curious thing that it takes the computer to bring back the physical aspect of the book. We can see how the book is a physical object through the medium of the computer, which is the most unmaterial thing there is. It's rather a beautiful paradox, and I think one that's actually I'm still struggling with, really. And that understanding, I think, takes us much closer to the idea of the book and what a book actually is in the Middle Ages. And you'll see why I'm emphasizing this in a moment. The immediate effect of this, when Boccaccio sets out his manuscript of the Teseida, as you can see in the bottom left-hand corner there, and you can see the elements of this, glosses, a very elaborate glossing of the text, which fills on some pages, the entire margins are filled, top, bottom, and side, with a scholarly or pseudo-scholarly gloss, which is effectively an alternative reading and an explanation of what's happening in the main text. Boccaccio put immense effort into creating this gloss. It's almost as long as the text itself. And there are parts where there is more gloss than text. Why did he do that? Why did he do that? He also put a lot of effort into using these ornamental capitals. You can see the capital here on the left-hand side, capital F, and these special kinds of markers in the margins saying this is important. Where did this come from? And the reason why Boccaccio did it, I think, pretty clearly is he had in mind a manuscript like you see at the top. This is a manuscript of Virgil's Aeneid, and it's written in Mantua, northern Italy, I think, in 1350, at exactly the same time that Boccaccio wrote his own autographed manuscript of Teseida. When Boccaccio sets out his manuscript in this form, he is consciously making a declaration which says, I am writing an Italian epic in the vernacular language. And he even went to my model is the Aeneid. Virgil wrote an Italian epic. in the vernacular language, Latin of the time, and I am doing the same thing. And in case you didn't get the message, he goes to great trouble to have exactly the same number of lines in Teseida as Virgil has at the Aeneid, 9,904 lines. He even crossed out some lines just to make sure he got to exactly the right number. And then on the right-hand side, we come to Chaucer. And you see exactly the same elements of the text, glosses, decorations within the text, and Chaucer is saying the same thing. I am writing an epic of my language too. My language is English, and my book is presented the same way as Boccaccio presented his book, which is an epic in Italian. And that's presented in the same way as Virgil's book, which is an epic in Latin. That's the point. And you can see the detail, the correspondence comes right down to this kind of detail. On the left-hand side, and on that side, is Boccaccio, an ornamented an initial letter that he decorated himself. In the middle is a Chaucer manuscript written by a scribe who worked with Chaucer for some 30 years, who uses exactly the same pattern of decoration, and on the for the Canterbury Tales. And on the right, yet another example from another Chaucer manuscript written by the same scribe with the same pattern of decoration. So scribes were not just copying the text, they were copying the way the text was put on the page. They were copying the way that books were made. And so now, finally, we come to the work formerly known as the Canterbury Tales, because it's not the Canterbury Tales. It's one of the first things we've discovered in our edition. It's actually, and on the very first page of what's probably the oldest manuscript of the Canterbury Tales, written by the scribe who probably worked with Chaucer for something like 25 or 30 years, was very likely actually employed by Chaucer. We even have a name for this scribe. He may have been called out in Pinkhurst. We have a biography. We have a date of him, born around 1360, lived to about 1430 or so, worked from Chaucer from around 1380 through to 1400 till Chaucer died, was still copying Chaucer manuscripts 20 years after Chaucer's death. So this is the scribe who probably worked with Chaucer. This is the first manuscript, the oldest manuscript, and right at the top of the first page, here is the title. Here beginneth the book of the Tales of Canterbury. No longer the Canterbury Tale, the book of the Tales of Canterbury. And for some reason, for nearly 500 years now, everyone has been using the wrong title. We're going to change that. So you can see, it was here beginneth the book of the Tales of Canterbury in one manuscript. Many, many manuscripts have at the end of the tales written, here is ended the book of the Tales of Canterbury. In every manuscript for over 100 years after Chaucer's death, which is every manuscript we have, it is called the Book of the Tales of Canterbury, not the Tales of Canterbury, not the Canterbury Tales. But in 1490, when print came along, and I blame print, if print had not been invented, we would still be calling it the Book of the Tales of Canterbury. But anyway, unfortunately, print was invented. And one of the unfortunate results of print was printers began to provide tables of contents, and which meant they'd make up their own titles. And that's what they did. They thought, I'm going to have a table of contents. There's no table of contents in the manuscript. I couldn't be bothered. The Book of the Tales of Canterbury. Let's make it shorter. So here beginneth 1492. We have Winkened word. Here beginneth the Book of Canterbury Tales. Oh dear, we're already no longer Tales of Canterbury. And I think that's very important. The Book of the Tales is not the same as saying the Book of the Canterbury Tales. Think about that. 1497, Richard Pinson, the Book of Chaucer named Canterbury Tales. Getting close. Finally, 1532, William Finn, may his memory be damned forever, finally uses the Canterbury Tales. And from that point on, the walls are down and everyone calls it the Canterbury Tales. Ever after, until now. We are going to call it the Book of the Tales of Canterbury, and damn you all. And you will all start too. And why it matters? Because it's a book of tales, not a book, the Book of the Canterbury Tales, a book of the Tales of Canterbury. And the reason why I think this is very significant is that book and tales are two opposite ideas. A tale is something that you speak, something that you tell. A book is something that's written. There's an immediate tension going on. When you have a book, when you have tales and you put them in a book, something happens. And Chaucer is playing upon that idea. By referring to the book, Chaucer is also, and in the layout of the manuscripts, making a statement. Boccaccio's Teseida is a poem of 12 books. The Aeneid is a book. He is saying that this is not just a set of tales. This is a book of tales. And you should be thinking of it the same way as Boccaccio thinks of his text, or Virgil thought of his text. And a declaration. Chaucer is doing for English what Boccaccio did for Italian and what Virgil did for Latin. And a book has, in the Middle Ages particularly, has two really important aspects. It is a compilation, or compilatio, and it is an ordinatio, an ordination, an ordering. It's a gathering of materials and an ordering of materials. So it's a deliberate statement about a whole world. And that's what Chaucer intended the Canterbury Tales to be. A book holds opposites in tension, and so does the tales. I think it's a wonderful thing that when Chaucer wrote his book of the tales, copying Boccaccio, Boccaccio writes a book about heroes and warriors set thousands of years ago. Men and women, courtly men and women living in palaces, riding fine horses. Chaucer writes a set of tales about ordinary people in England, and he includes a tale in which there a man farts in the face of a man kisses the ass of a woman, and there's a fart divided into 12 and things like that, and they're full of hypocrites and evil and horrible people, but also really good people too. So it's all there. So, too far? Yeah. So along the way, so we have all this material. We have a lot more yet that we've discovered. First, a new title, which itself I think is going to change the way the tales are read. But we've also developed a way of thinking about our edition, which is actually derives, in fact, from the Greek New Testament idea of the initial text, but we take a different direction. What we are saying, when we say we say the title should be the Book of the Tales of Canterbury, we are not saying that Chaucer told his scribe to write, "Here beginneth the Book of the Tales of Canterbury" as the title of the tales. We don't say it. Maybe Chaucer did that. Maybe he didn't. But we can't know, and we can't convince anybody that we know. There is no way of knowing that. So what we are doing is we're saying that we are not giving you the oldest text, we're giving you the newest text of the tales. This is very much Barbara Bortoletto's idea. And what we are saying is this is the best place to start reading this book. If you begin with a title which says, "Here beginneth a title which is the Book of the Tales of Canterbury," that introduces you to a world of complexity involving books and intentions and tales and all the tensions between them, which is absent. It's a better place to start reading the tales is to begin with this title rather than the Canterbury Tales. Well, this is not all we've discovered. Just a few more things we've discovered. For over a century, editors have regarded these two manuscripts as fundamental to the text of the tales. Henget, which you've already seen already, the Henget manuscript of 1400, probably written by the scribe who knew Chaucer very well, probably worked with him, as I said, for 20 years, possibly supervised by Chaucer himself. There are some hints and suggestions that Chaucer actually supervised part of the writing of this manuscript. And then he actually died during its writing, and the manuscript then became something of a mess as a result. So that's 1400. Second manuscript written by the same scribe 15 years later, very different, but the same scribe. And it appears, but by this time, whereas the Henget manuscript is full of all kinds of inconsistencies and incomprehensions and misunderstandings, this manuscript, the Ellesmere manuscript on that right-hand side, you can see it's beautiful. It's a luxury object. It's written on the very finest parchment that you could get. It's not been eaten by rats. It's not had sort of water spilled all over it. It's been looked after carefully for hundreds of years. Absolutely gorgeous manuscript. Those two manuscripts are fundamental to the text, and they were the two manuscripts. We have added a third manuscript to this. So we have found a third manuscript, written about 1450, 50 years later, which is why no scholars have taken it seriously before us. And when we started doing our analyses of the text, the first thing we discovered that every way we looked at the text of the tales had Ellesmere, those two manuscripts, Ellesmere and Haggett, right next to each other. Of course, we expect that. What we did not expect that this third manuscript would over and over again come up right next to the first two. There was no reason to think that would happen. Some people had said before, oh, there's some good readings in this manuscript. This is surprising. We discovered not just some good readings, thousands and thousands of good readings, over and over again, right through the whole tale. About 19 lines out of 20, the three manuscripts are identical, where other manuscripts change and differ and have other readings. So this manuscript becomes very important. Not just that. That's not just, and we began to ask ourselves, why is this manuscript so like the other two? And we analysed the spelling patterns of all three manuscripts, and indeed all the manuscripts together. And this is the great power of digital editing. We have a huge amount of information about how the manuscripts are actually spelt, about the spellings of the scribes. What do they actually write? How do they spell the word good or God or bad or man or woman, etc.? So we could analyze those spelling patterns, and we found from that another images. No, I can't show it. I haven't got it here. We found that once more, the Christchurch manuscript, CH, is identical in spelling, near identical in spelling to the other two. So close that we come to the conclusion that that manuscript must be based on another manuscript written by the same scribe who wrote the other two manuscripts. So we now have three manuscripts of the Canterbury Tales, which are fundamental. And that makes a very big difference, because when two disagree, we have a third. And usually, almost always, you can say, okay, one made a mistake, the other two have got it right. So it makes editing much more certain and much more safe. Some other things were found along the way, which I'm not going to, which I'll just go through fairly quickly here. We found among this different groupings of the manuscripts. So we found some very interesting puzzles as we got to work with the manuscripts. By this stage, I should explain, in case anyone hasn't heard this already, that we were using tools from evolutionary biology to try to gain an understanding of how the manuscripts relate to each other, and we found this quite extraordinarily successful. One of the very rare cases where a tool developed in a completely different area, to trace the relationships among species, can be used in another area which has no relationship whatever with that first area, but shares the same fundamental concept. And the concept is descent with modification, as laid out by Charles Darwin, of course. So species are divided into families according to the relationships they share, the characteristics they share and don't share. Manuscripts divide into families in exactly the same way. There's a lot of debate about that, but fundamentally this holds. So we were able to create these pictures of relationships among manuscripts. But then we had to ask ourselves, what do they mean? And we found this group of manuscripts. In the center, you can see our three friends, CHELHJ, and a bunch of other manuscripts. But when we look very closely at them, we realize this was not a group of manuscripts in the sense they had shared errors. What they actually did was they did not have shared errors. That's what made them different, which is actually a very difficult concept for traditional schematology to deal with. But they definitely kept over and over again, they have readings, which are very good readings, which other manuscripts lose. So they become a group because of just that. They retain really good readings, which others lose. Then we have other groups. And this led us to thinking very much about what does a diagram like this actually mean? When you look at this, you think it's families, but it's not families because that group, the O group, are not a family. They just happen to share readings which others don't have. There are three groups here, however, which are families. That very large group on the right-hand side, which has, there are readings which they all share, which are introduced. So they're a family. There are two other groups here, one down below and one above, one smaller one down below. They also are families. Then you have a massive manuscripts which don't belong to anything. What do you do with them? So among other things, we've had to think about what does it actually mean? This is my own theory, which is yet to be tested, because I think in terms of this as being like an auditorium. When you look at a diagram like that of relationships, you should not think this is a diagram where everything is grouped because they're related. Really, it's more like a group of people who come into an auditorium. The first people in the auditorium, say a doctoral exam, the first to arrive are the most interested spectators, and they choose the best seats, and they sit together, but they're not related to each other. They just sit together because they got there early and they got the best seats, very like the O manuscripts. Then you have three families, the other three families, and they sit together because they're related. And then you have a very large group that just sit wherever they can. That's all those other manuscripts that don't belong to any group. So you have, if you think of it this way, it becomes much easier to understand, I think, what's actually happening, what's going on. And you think of it too as an exam which goes on, and people move around during the exam. People get up, they come back, they don't sit in the same places. And that's exactly what happens with manuscripts. Manuscripts behave like doctoral students when it comes down to it. That's a useful thought. So along the way, this I think is developing in our thesis that we are doing things that people haven't done before. We are thinking about stemata and manuscript relationships in ways that people have not done, not formally. I think actually in many cases they have done so, but they haven't acknowledged it. But one of the powers of the digital method, you have to acknowledge your steps. You have to be aware of why you are making the conclusions that you are making. So what we are actually doing as editors, we are creating a text. What we do is we look at the evidence we have and we seek the best explanation we can at every point of the text. So every reading in our edition is a balance of probabilities. And we are great believers in the idea of Contini, that an edition is a working hypothesis, and our edition is a good place for others to begin their reading. It's an initial text which others can use to develop their own ideas and understandings of the text. An example of this, just one example among many. What do you do in a case like this? Here is one line from The Wife of Bath's prologue, and all editions read, I made him of the same wood a crosser. And the last word here, crosser, cross. It's a very simple statement. There's no problem with the text. It has an obvious and simple meaning. I made a cross. And that's it. But a group of very important manuscripts have trosser, T-R-O-C-E, which makes no sense. What do we do? Now the letters C and T are very easy to confuse. And that appears to be what happened here. Someone, right back at the beginning of the tradition, had a C wrote a C which looked like a T. And the very first manuscripts came along and they looked at that and said, it's T. And they wrote T. Then later, people looked and said, nah, doesn't make any sense, and changed the T to a C. Or perhaps they just read the first manuscript as a C correctly. So what do? We think we will probably put the reading trosser in our edition because it makes no sense. Exactly because it makes no sense. And we want people to think, oh, sometimes it doesn't make any sense. And that's why you need to have some intelligence and you have to make up your own mind about what to do. Okay, so I've just got to finish this fairly quickly here. So what are we going to do with all this? Well, one thing we're going to do is we intend to publish as best we can in a form that's going to last at least 500 years. Cambridge University Press has been in existence nearly 500 years, so obviously we'd like to last as long as them. And that will also mean publishing with a major publisher, if we can manage that. I hope we can. We want to have an interface that's usable by a wide range of users. And if you've seen the Commedia edition, it'll be very similar to that. Not quite the same, but very similar. And in summary, if we want digital philology to be la norma, and I love the manifesto if it's a statement of aspiration and not a statement of actual fact, then it should be, digital philology should be la norma. To do this, we have to make discoveries which matter and which can only be made by digital methods. And that's certainly in the case of what we've discovered about the Canterbury Tales. We could not have found those things without digital methods. We have to make the editions usable and attractive and stable and available. We have to develop new models of the critical text. And I think we found ourselves doing that, particularly in the last few years. And if those things happen, we might actually get our cambio di paradigma, I hope, fondamentale, or the German thing which I won't even try to translate. And so, grazie.
Okay, so thank you very much indeed. And the floor is now open. So we have enough time so that we made a lot of contention and statements here that can now be discussed. So everyone is invited to raise your voice, your hand at home and here in the room. And I try to keep trace of your intentions to ask us. So you can also use the chat. I try to control everything here.
There are some chats in there. There are some chats in there. Oh, yes.
I see a lot of
mostly yes,
nice colleagues here. So, and yeah, the floor is open. So please. I have lots of questions, but I wait.
All right. I can ask some questions for listeners too. If there are a few people there I'd like to ask questions about. But we should. Anyone here in the audience?
Otherwise, because you had this beautiful ending with the norm, the normalfall, the norm, and that is putting people into trouble. Is it the norm, the digital scholarly edition? Is this the norm for scientific representation of historical text or documents? And I would say it's yes. So I mean, it's written in the context of a manifesto, so you have to make your claims.
Okay.
All right. And it's more the normative character.
Right.
And I think it is also part of the language we use because there has been a paradigm shift. So if we talk about what is an edition, I would think the edition, for example, a good example is the Inglese edition.
Yeah.
I would say, according to the language we talk as digital humanities scholars, this is not an edition actually. Because what is an edition? An edition enables you to make a statement and to understand, read, and reflect and analyze a work in its entirety. The edition, the term used as an Italian philologist, is not enabling you to analyze the work in its entirety. It is not a representation of the work, whereas the edition by Fouchon and yourself, he uses the best possible representation on the market.
Yes.
And so he has been enabled by the digital edition to make his statements. Hypothesis, you can agree or disagree, and Dante scholars never agree. So this is completely useless for someone who does not agree on his assumptions. And that's the normal case for Italian philology or for traditional philologists. So in this regard, every Italian scholar or traditional philologist would say, of course, it's an edition, but an edition according to the tradition of that philology, but it is not an edition actually as in the terminology of digital humanities scholarship.
Right. Well, I think actually I think there are some things Inglese would have been able to do even better if he'd used some more of the tools.
Voilà.
There are a couple of without getting all the way, I think the Glazed edition is quite actually really wonderful edition. So I'm not, I don't want to. It's not right to express any disappointment in it, but I think actually the next steps of I could imagine future steps in Dante scholarship. An obvious thing to do is to extend the number of manuscripts, the full text transcription of the manuscripts, beyond the 7 that we had. And there are at least 20 or more, which one would argue very strongly should be transcribed and collated. And then there are the possibilities of, we've done a little bit of work on analysing patterns of spelling in the manuscripts. And the fact that many of the manuscripts are written in different areas of Italy and reflect the local dialects provides all sorts of possibilities for analysis of the dialects, the relations among the manuscripts in that way, which is what we've been able to do with the Canterbury Tales. And I think also there is, which I think is something which is going to come up with the Greek New Testament scholars too. What sort of text should we be providing? How is that text to be used by readers? We found it actually really liberating, in fact, to have this much information, and also to have adopted an approach which says we're not trying to reconstruct the archetype, which is an impossible thing to do anyway. We're trying to make something useful, and we're trying to create a dialogue with our readers, which of course is again something which the digital medium lends itself to very well. So there can be a real reaction. And I think it's actually happening in the world, in the New Testament world, through the medium of the blogs. And one can see that developing as editions themselves become available and commentaries on individual readings can become matters of debate also. So I think we're actually, and I think the other thing is, I think we're really only at the very beginning of this process. I would have liked to be a lot further down. I would like to be where I am now 30 years ago, but well, it's taken that long to get here. Any questions here? I am dying to ask Hugh Horton. Are you listening, Hugh? Maybe he's gone away.
No, I'm here, Peter.
Oh, Hugh. I really loved your comments on what I went out. I walked myself on that plank called Greek New Testament scholarship, which, as you know, I've done several times in the past, which is a dangerous plank to be on. What are you're at the heart of the enterprise? What are your thoughts about, in a few minutes?
No, I mean, I would endorse everything you'd said, and I think the development of the coherence method was only possible because of the digital approach. The question is really the extent to which this is still a method rather than another digital tool. And I think our colleagues in Minster are very keen that it should be described as a method. Other people have said, well, it's just yet another piece of information that you take into account when making decisions. It's not actually a method per se. And that's because once you've got digital material, you could use it to make all sorts of other questions. I mean, other approaches. You can put it into phylogenetic software. You can use a cladistics program or something like that. And that gives you the opportunity, that gives you other tools and other means of making editorial decisions. I don't know if you're still there, Peter. You've gone very very still.
Hello, we are back. Can you hear us well again?
Yes, I think you are back.
Okay, please, Hugh, if you can continue your promising statement. So
you began a really interesting sentence.
Well, no, I was saying that so the question about whether the coherence method is genuinely a method or the tool, because once you have data in a digital form, once you have an apparatus in a digital form, you have all sorts of different ways of analyzing that, and you can use phylogenetics, you can use cladistics, and so on, and that all gives editors material to go on when it comes to reconstructing the history of the text, but none of them I think is exclusive, and I think there's a plurality of methods out there, and that's the question for New Testament scholars at the minute. To what extent is this a method rather than just one way of working among many?
Yeah, that's very well put. And I have found in my recent talks with New Testament scholars a great willingness for people to explore. Stephen Carson, for example, is very eager. It's not that he has a particular problem with the CBGM, but he would like there to be debate and inquiry into others, but which is happening, in fact. And as we all have found, the group in Munster, the parents or godfathers of that tool, very cooperative and very open to exactly that kind of collaboration. As you know, Andrew Edmondson did a lovely thesis a few years ago, comparing the results of the coherence tool with phylogenetics. So it's, and again, I think the gift here is because of the availability of the data, this actually makes possible that plurality of methods that we all want. Other comments? Or Hugh, do you have anything more? I'll see. Yeah, great to see you, Hugh. I'm coming to England sometime, so I'll be.
Oh, right. Oh, do drop in. I think the one other point which I have made in Flint, and I wonder what you think of it, is you were accusing New Testament people of focusing on the text rather than editing the manuscripts. But my claim is that every time we make a transcription of a manuscript, we're producing a semi-diplomatic edition of at least that book in that manuscript, if not the complete manuscript, because we do record information such as page breaks, line breaks, and so on, corrections are there. There are varying degrees of paratextual information as well. And so, I mean, the excuse I've given, the reason it takes so long to edit the New Testament is in effect, when you are creating the data in a digital sphere, you are creating an edition of each witness before you can go on to create an edition of the text. And so, you know, we have 200 editions of manuscripts of Galatians, which have the same lineation, which you can map to that and has all the spelling. And then, of course, I go along and collate it and I wipe out all of the unusual spelling, but that data remains there for somebody to use and collate. So I just wonder, certainly that the collate methodology involves editing every witness before you edit the text to an extent. And I would say that's what we've done in the New Testament too.
Yeah. No, I think that's one of the reasons I think it's been so successful. He's created this immense amount of data, which you're only, all of us are really just the beginnings of, to explore the possibilities of that data, all the different kinds of patterns, the ways in which it can be studied. So, as I said before, we are just at the beginning of this work. But I think one of the lessons of the Greek New Testament project is, in this case, if you build it, people have come. They really have come. I don't know who else you collaborate besides yourself and Munster now. You have who are the other collaborators? You have so many.
Well, the Revelation, the Apocalypse, is just about to be published in a couple of months by a team at Wuppertal who have produced it. And we now, on the Pauline epistles, we have we're collaborating with KU Leuven. Christina Kleinecker has an institute there working on one epistle. There's an American seminary, and in North Carolina, which is working on the pastoral epistles. Also, we have Abilene Christian University working on Colossians. So we now have 4 or 5 partners for the Pauline epistles as well, all using the same approach, the same data standards, the same guidelines, the same tools.
Yep. And all because David Parker went to the Society of Predictive Literature in 1997.
Absolutely.
And Klaus and me. Yeah. Thank you, Hugh.
More questions?
I think you have one in the chat.
Oh, we do?
No, it's just I'm checking the chat. It's just they're complaining that we lost connection.
All right.
There are,
yeah.
So not in this. I have the chat open here. Yeah. But please feel encouraged. Here comes from Peter Scharf. You can also.
Hello, Peter. Again.
Raise your voice. I can read, or you can read it yourself, Peter.
Oh yes, is
you unmute yourself? Yeah, please.
Oh yes.
Unmuted.
No, Peter Scharf. So
I'm wondering if there's a written description, a paper or something that describes the coherence method.
Absolutely. one of the problems. There are so many initial descriptions, but there are a lot. There is a very good one, I think, Greg Paulson, who I referred to from Munster, did one a few. There is one on, I think, on the virtual manuscript room site. There's a link to that. There are even a couple of one-sentence descriptions, which I think is a little bit too compressed, maybe, to give you a real
That's too
sense.
compressed.
Yeah, but there are actually several. There's the Stephen Gary Tommy Wasserman book that I had on screen contains an excellent introduction and also many examples of the method being used and lots of illustrations. So yes, there is no lack of good explanations of the coherent space method, which is one of the reasons
Okay.
why it comes.
Can someone share those references in the chat?
Yeah, I'll see if I can dig some out here while somebody else is asking a question. Yeah, how do we do that?
Thank you.
We are trying to find but if you simply just Google coherent space genealogical method, the stuff will pour out at you really well. There are just so many, and pick the top ones, and you can't be far wrong.
Well, here's the link in the chat. So, Hugh posted the link.
Use posted one.
Yeah, very good.
Okay,
Thank you very
excellent.
much.
Thanks, you.
More questions? I mean, again, the Nestle-Aland edition is maybe, again, an example for what actually is not an edition. It's a statement.
Sure.
And I mean, it's and the coherence-based method is an analytic tool to generate a snapshot of the databases, which is the actual edition. So the beautiful data that has been created, including the transcripts, actually, the diplomatic transcripts that do not change, but the coherence-based method, you have to stop at some stage, even though there is no reason to stop, because I mean the basis changes, and also the algorithm can be or has to be repeated several times, as far as I understood.
Yes, you can. There are
in this case, it's just a snapshot, one statement to make some sense of the data available, produced at a certain moment in time.
Right, and in fact,
it will be useless in 10 years. The data instead, will be reused.
The data will outlast.
So the actual edition is in the data.
True.
And the books that are printed, I think we have the 50s edition or something,
right?
50s revision. They are just snapshots or momentary assumptions based on some hypothesis.
Yeah, Hugh made an interesting distinction between a method and a tool. We might have many tools and only one method. I think that's your a fair reading of what you said, Hugh, I hope. And I think that's one of the consensus, that you calling it a method is maybe implying there is only one method, and that's not the argument at all. This is a method that's giving very useful results now. And as you said, there will be other methods, there will be other tools.
The coherence-based method is based on a methodology to provide the data in a format so that it can be applied.
Exactly. Yeah, it's both a
so
tool
the actual method, the editorial method, is the collection and the provision and
I think we have
definition of the data.
There is
in order to produce. If others disagree with the coherence-based method because they think it's too much magic and too much unknown, or you don't agree, then you can use a different method and produce and make another statement.
Yeah, and people are that actually.
But they will still use the same data.
Yeah, I think there is a synthesis, a interchange between data, tools, methods, theory as well. Behind all this, you have to have a theory about how text develop. For myself, for example, I am not so sure that contamination is actually anything like as large a factor as has been many editors, many edition projects have included. But these are really ongoing debates which we can't begin to have until we have the data. Hugh has his hand up again.
It was just, I think there was a misapprehension there that the coherence method doesn't produce the text. The way the editio maior is edited, there's a committee of 6 or 7 or 8 editors who argue about the text in the light of the data given by the coherence method. So it's still a committee of editors who are arguing about how they interpret the data. And the coherence method allows them to say whether or not the tradition is sufficiently coherent that, if you have a reading which looks entirely schematically coherent, that may easily have been introduced at an early point and therefore is schematically coherent. Whereas if you have lots of a reading which is incoherent, that doesn't mean it's not original. It just means it's more likely to be reintroduced. So it's another point of data which a committee can argue about. And the editio maior's text is established by the editorial committee arguing about those results, rather than feeding the text in and seeing if the computer says yes or not, which is certainly not what digital editing is about.
Yeah, I don't think, I can't imagine there's ever a case of the editors simply adopting a reading just because the genealogical method says, oh, this is, if you do this, you get this reading. All the discussions I've seen have been on the lines of, well, this is suggestive and we may accept or we may not accept. We may go somewhere else for our reading. Other questions? Are we getting lost here?
No, there's a question. Maybe it's convenient if you come closer so people can hear you in the microphone. If you come here to the desk and speak here to the small device. Come closer.
Come closer.
You can also sit. Yeah, please sit down.
Thank you for the presentation. First of all, it was really useful. I
Don't get nervous when I.
And what I want to ask about is is there any the basic standard of guideline for digital edition, or it's changed every year when new technology appear?
We have loads of questions. That's one of actually. Well, we know about the TEI. We've talked about that, and there are a lot. One of the problems, though, in fact, when I said a little frivolously, we have loads of guidelines. The existence of guidelines, and they are only guidelines, is not a guarantee that any two groups will use them in the same way. In fact, it's a certainty that different editorial groups will work in different ways. One of the things that's been very important in the Greek New Testament is not just they adopted the same standards, but they discussed the standards. They worked out the same. They agreed on the implementation of those standards. They decided we're going to call this, we're going to use this encoding to represent this particular feature in a manuscript. We're going to have a uniform standard for comparison. We're going to, as well as use the same tool, we're going to try to each achieve predictable results. So the answer really is it's not the standards. Standards are the start. It's the collaboration you build on the standards, which is a guarantee of conformity and being able to use data from one group by another group. And then, of course, the need for documentation for that also, for people to be aware of how that's achieved. But it's actually, none of it's possible unless there is at least a base.
Yeah, I just want to know, is there any basic guideline to start?
Yeah, the TI is a very good place to start. And the next place to look is to find a project like yours, which looks like your project. Not many projects look like your project, but still. But actually there are some. There are many projects which are dealing with manuscripts, individual manuscripts, and how to encode text within manuscripts. So you can find models and then use that for your own work or that of your group.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
I should say.
But these guys are basically guidelines for the data level. On
yes,
the presentational level, and what you actually then produce as the edition so that people look at is there are few aspects. There are routines, there are practices, schools and tools that are being used to present and visualize your data that you created according to those guidelines.
But my question was the both of them, the data and the projection.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, thank you. Another question in the chat. So who is it? James.
Yes, hello. I work in Heidelberg, and I work in the field of papyrology, where we have a large digital platform with TEI encoded texts of Greek documents coming from Egypt. And one of the things that we try to do on that is to preserve the history of choices that are made and preserve the history of how those choices came to be made. And Peter, you'd mentioned just a few minutes ago about the fact that, or I think it was Hugh as well, who's saying that when choices are made about readings that may have been turned up by the coherence model for a New Testament text, none of those will be taken over because the machine made the choice, but there will be a discussion about it. In the context of the New Testament, is there an attempt to try to preserve the reasoning behind the choices so that those become part of the digital edition, the digital tools at our disposal? Because when academics get together and make decisions, they have good reasons for these decisions. 20 years later, finding out what those reasons were and why they were made could be very helpful to create the next version. That's a big question.
This is one that Hugh would be much better placed to answer than me. I've certainly seen an enormous amount of discussion at the level of the individual reading. Books are filled with it.
Of course.
Or actually formally as part of the actual Hugh. You know much better than I what was happening.
Yes. So I've given you a link to the free version, but the Editio Maior is published in 3 volumes. One is the text, one is the appendices, and then one is a volume of studies, which always begins with a textual commentary. So for those parts of the text where the committee had difficulty or indeed employed, because I mean, you don't employ the coherence-based method to decide in 90% of cases.
No, sure.
You only apply it in 10. And so in those 10% of cases, they've kept a record. They because it's an online interface, and again, this is part of the digital approach, everybody can record their comments in that interface while they work through the different iterations that Franz was talking about. And then the textual commentary is built up of the individual comments which were in that interface and sanitized and made available for the public. The link I've put through does that. But so a textual commentary is an integral part of producing that edition.
Yeah, okay. Many thanks. Yeah, that answers my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter, for this inspiring talk. Thank you very much, everyone at home. We will have you back maybe on the 21st of February, 17th of April, with two local heroes here from Ca Foscari, Ilaria Calaui and Federico Bernardini, and they will talk about new digital methods to reveal pottery forming techniques, micro-CT analysis of Minoan vases and Crete. From Crete, sorry. Okay. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening.